He was a billionaire CEO with nothing left to believe in until his dying son whispered the name of a cleaning woman no one remembered hiring. She wasn't supposed to be there, but what she knew and who she was would change everything. And the world was about to find out. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Classroom fell into chaos the moment Caleb Vance collapsed. His small frame crumpled beside his desk, eyes wide with panic as his breathing grew rapid and erratic. A teacher screamed for help, students cried out in confusion, and in the hallway, the echo of slamming lockers froze. Inside the janitor's closet down the hall, Rosa Martinez dropped her mop and bolted toward the noise. Her instincts moved faster than reason. By the time she reached the classroom, Aiden was pale and shaking, his little chest rising with terrified, shallow gasps. Teachers hovered, helpless. A nurse fumbled with her phone, but it was Rosa who crossed the room and knelt beside him. Her hair was tied in a loose braid, her uniform wrinkled and damp from a long shift, but her voice was steady and warm. "Aiden," she whispered gently, "look at me, mijo. You're safe now. I'm right here." His terrified eyes locked onto hers. She reached for his hand, hesitant but firm. "Breathe with me, okay? Like this, in and out, just like the waves." Tears spilled down his cheeks, but his breathing slowed. "That's it," she said, her tone like a lullaby. "You're doing so good. You're not alone." Doctors arrived moments later and rushed to assess him, but none could deny the shock written across their faces. Aiden, the boy who never allowed touch or comfort, had calmed under the arms of a cleaning woman. And he hadn't let go of her hand. Minutes later, Caleb Vance stormed through the double doors of the ER. His presence was like thunder in a hallway of whispers. Dressed in a dark, tailored suit, jaw set like stone, he radiated wealth, authority, and the kind of pressure that made staff step back without being asked. "Where is he?" he barked. A nurse stammered an answer and pointed toward the observation bay. Caleb turned the corner and froze. Aiden was lying in a hospital bed, a small oxygen tube tucked under his nose, and Rosa Martinez sat at his side, gently brushing hair from his forehead. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" His voice cut like glass. Rosa stood abruptly, her face flushing with alarm. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to overstep." "You don't belong here," he said sharply, approaching fast. "Get away from my son." Aiden whimpered, clutching Rosa's hand tighter. "Papa, don't let her go," he cried. The words sliced through Caleb like a knife. The doctors intervened quickly, explaining how Rosa had been the only one able to calm Aiden. The boy's panic attack could have escalated to cardiac distress, but she had somehow grounded him. Still, Rosa stepped back, eyes downcast. "I didn't mean to interfere," she murmured. "I was just cleaning the east wing when I heard the call. I didn't think, I just ran." A supervisor came rushing in, red-faced and furious. "She's not even supposed to be near patients. She broke protocol. She's terminated, effective immediately." Rosa didn't protest. She simply nodded, gave Aiden one last reassuring smile, and turned to leave. But before she could reach the exit, Aiden screamed. "No, don't let her go." Caleb looked at his son, who hadn't cried since his mother's funeral, and then at the woman walking away with trembling hands and wet shoes. "Wait," he said, his voice now low and conflicted. "Just wait." Rosa turned slowly, confusion etched into her face. Caleb rubbed his temple. "Stay, just until he's stable." Rosa hesitated. There was something unreadable in her eyes, something like fear. She gave a quiet nod. And behind them, unseen by all, a nurse whispered, "She just walked in like an angel, and now none of us know who she really is." That night, the Vance family's private hospital suite was unusually quiet. Aiden slept peacefully for the first time in days, his tiny frame tucked under sterile white sheets. His hand still loosely held the corner of a blanket, Rosa had folded over him. Baby. Caleb stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out into the city skyline. The glow of distant lights flickered against the glass, but his mind wasn't on stock prices or board meetings. It was on that moment, his son's small voice trembling with fear, begging for the stranger to stay. He glanced over at Rosa, who sat quietly in the corner. Her clothes were simple, clean now. Her hair was tied back, her eyes downcast as if she hoped to disappear into the shadows of the room. "You said you were a cleaner," Caleb said without turning, "but you calmed him faster than any specialist I've paid for." Rosa looked up, startled. "I just spoke to him like he was a child, not a case number." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Most people wouldn't have dared, especially not after being told to stay out of the medical wing. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "I've seen panic before. I recognized it." Something about the way she said it made Caleb turn around. "You've seen it where?" Her gaze dropped again. "That doesn't matter." The door opened briefly as a nurse came in to check Aiden's vitals. Caleb stepped aside, watching Rosa carefully, but asking no more questions, for now. After the nurse left, he finally broke the silence. "You're not trained in childcare, medical aid, or trauma therapy. Yet you reached him when no one else could." "I didn't reach him," Rosa said, eyes fixed on Aiden. "He reached for me." Caleb exhaled slowly, then took a seat across from her. "I'm not going to pretend I understand any of this," he said, "but if my son is calmer with you around, then I want you to stay. Officially." Rosa's posture stiffened. "As what?" "His temporary caregiver," Caleb replied. "We'll arrange housing, payment, everything, just until we find a long-term solution." She shook her head. "No payment. I didn't do it for that." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Then why did you do it?" Rosa didn't answer. Instead, she stood up, walked over to the bed, and gently adjusted Aiden's pillow. Her movements were careful, instinctive, like someone who had done this before, many times. "He was scared and alone," she said finally. "I know what that feels like." That quiet admission lingered in the air. Caleb studied her face. There were hints of exhaustion there, maybe even pain, something deeper than fatigue from scrubbing floors. But there was also a calm grace, the kind he hadn't seen in years. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said slowly. "You showing up when you did, it wasn't random." Rosa's eyes flicked toward him, guarded, unreadable. "You're hiding something," he said. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "I won't ask. Not yet. But if you stay, you'll be in my house, around my son. And if there's anything I need to know, anything that could harm him, you need to tell me." Rosa nodded once, curtly. "Understood." He leaned back, uncertain whether to feel reassured or more concerned. But when Aiden stirred in his sleep, murmuring her name again, the answer was made for him. Rosa would stay. As Caleb exited the room to make arrangements, Rosa sat back down, brushing her thumbs softly over the fabric of the chair, her mind far away. Because what Caleb didn't know was that Rosa Martinez wasn't her real name, and the secret she carried wasn't just dangerous. It could destroy everything. Rosa moved through the quiet hallway with practiced steps, balancing a tray of soup and soft crackers. She knew the boy's appetite was still delicate, but he had smiled when she promised him homemade caldo like her abuela used to make. Inside the room, Aiden was propped up with pillows, a book in his lap, and his eyes lighting up as she entered. "You came back," he said softly, his voice still raspy. "I told you I would," Rosa said, setting the tray down gently. "We keep our promises in my family." Aiden looked at her like she was some kind of superhero. "Dad doesn't smile much, but I think he almost did when he saw you yesterday." She chuckled lightly, brushing his damp hair back from his forehead. "Then maybe we'll have to try harder to make him laugh." Caleb stood at the door, watching, unseen, unnoticed. He had arrived moments earlier but hadn't entered. He watched Rosa lean in, begin to softly a lullaby in Spanish that he vaguely remembered from his own childhood trips to Latin America. Aiden was transfixed. His hands, which often slumped into anxious fists, opened, relaxed. Later, in his office, Caleb flipped through his son's recovery notes. Sleeping longer, smiling more, respond positively to Rosa's presence. He frowned at the page, then turned it over. There were no qualifications listed for Rosa Martinez. No certifications, no medical training, just the temporary employment form from the hospital's janitorial staff. His curiosity sharpened. The following evening, Rosa arrived at the Vance estate. Caleb had asked her to temporarily move in, just until Aiden was stable. She had refused at first, but Aiden's pleading had weakened her resolve. She sat at the boy's bedside again, telling him stories about animals that could speak and queens who healed with their words. "Do you believe in magic?" Owain asked, wide-eyed. "Sometimes," Rosa answered softly, her hand resting gently over his. "But mostly, I believe in kindness. That's a magic all its own." Behind them, Caleb watched again, hidden by the hallway's shadows. She didn't know she had an audience, but he was starting to realize she always acted with this much care, whether someone watched or not. That weekend, a family gathering was held at the estate, Caleb's inner circle. Executives, investors, family friends. Rosa kept to the kitchen and corners, clearing plates when she could, never making eye contact. But she couldn't avoid everything. "Excuse me," a sharp voice said from behind her. Rosa turned slowly. An older woman in pearls stood with narrowed eyes, examining her face. "Aren't you?" "No, it can't be," the woman murmured, then turned to a friend beside her. "She looks just like that girl from the foundation in Caracas." Rosa's blood turned cold. She dropped the tray she was holding, the clang of dishes startling nearby guests. She bent quickly to collect them, muttering apologies in thickened English, and hurried toward the staff corridor. She was shaking by the time she reached the empty service hall. Her hands braced the sink, her breath uneven. Caleb appeared moments later. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice low. Rosa didn't meet his eyes. "Nothing. I'm just the help. I'll clean up and leave." "You're not just the help," he said, firm now. "You're the one who's had more impact on my son than a dozen therapists." Her voice broke as she replied, "That's kind of you, but I don't belong here." He studied her. "You're hiding something." Rosa looked up at him, her eyes bright with unspoken fear. "Some of us don't have the luxury of being known." And she turned away before he could ask more. That night, the mansion was silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the wooden stairs. Caleb sat alone in his home office, the glow of his laptop screen washing his face in pale blue light. The question gnawed at him. Who was Rosa Martinez? He pulled up the estate employee records again. Her file was unusually sparse. A hospital reference, a temporary ID, no social security number listed, only a tax ID number issued under an emergency registry. He leaned closer. The address was a run-down apartment complex outside the city, one known more for squatters than renters. It didn't make sense. The next morning, Rosa arrived early, as usual. She moved quietly through the kitchen, packing a lunchbox for Aiden, little notes tucked inside, apple slices carved into stars. She wasn't expecting Caleb to walk in, still in his black running shirt, sweat glistening on his temples. "You don't have to do that," he said softly. "I want to," she replied, without looking up. "He's just a boy who deserves comfort." He leaned against the counter. "You know he asked me last night if he could call you his angel nanny?" Rosa's hands paused. "He's a sweet child." "He also said you remind him of his mother," Caleb added, watching her closely. "But nicer." Rosa turned slowly. Her face was unreadable, but her voice cracked just slightly. "That's a heavy compliment." Caleb didn't press further, not yet. Later that afternoon, Rosa took Aiden out to the garden for sunlight and quiet play. They sat beneath the canopy of a willow tree, Aiden drawing with chalk on the stone path, Rosa humming faintly. Aiden looked up suddenly and asked, "Where did you learn to tell stories like that?" Rosa smiled. "From my mama. And once, I even went to school for it." "School?" Aiden blinked. "You were a teacher?" "I was studying to be one," Rosa said gently. Before I had to go." He tilted his head. Go where? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Someplace far away. Inside the mansion, Caleb watched from his office window, troubled. Her answers were kind but evasive. Every time she let a piece of herself show, she sealed it back up like it was dangerous. That evening, he couldn't sleep. The mystery had lodged itself too deeply in his chest. He opened a browser and began searching. He typed, Rosa Martinez, and was met with a flood of results, none matching her. Then, on a hunch, he added keywords: Caracas, teacher, evacuation, fire. An article popped up, 7 years old. Headline: Orphanage blaze in Caracas, mystery woman saves children, vanishes afterward. There was no clear photo, just a blurry image of a young woman holding 2 small children, soot-stained and wrapped in a wool blanket. Her face was turned, half hidden. But the scarf was familiar. Caleb leaned closer, heart pounding. The next morning, he didn't say anything to her, but at breakfast, Aiden ran up to Rosa, clinging to her arm. I had a bad dream again, but I remembered your lullaby and it helped. She knelt and wrapped him in her arms, whispering softly in Spanish. Watching them, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Trust, unexpected and terrifying, was starting to form. But so were questions. He knew Rosa Martinez had entered their lives like a whisper, but now her presence echoed loudly through their hearts. And as she tucked Aiden's blanket gently around his shoulders and smoothed his hair, Caleb knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. He just wasn't sure if he was ready for what it might reveal. The office light glowed faintly as Caleb sat behind his glass desk, Aiden's most recent medical reports untouched beside his keyboard. His eyes were fixed on the screen. It had taken only a few clicks. One too many lingering questions about Rosa's background, one too many inconsistencies in the paperwork she'd submitted. He didn't want to go digging, but something about the gap in her records nagged at him. When the system finished loading, he saw it. No social security number, no verified address, no employment history prior to 2 years ago. Rosa Martinez wasn't her real name. He leaned back, troubled. Caleb Vance was not a man who jumped to conclusions, but Aiden's growing attachment to Rosa and her fear every time someone in a suit walked by made the truth undeniable. She was undocumented and hiding. The next day, Rosa arrived early as usual, humming softly as she tucked Aiden's favorite blanket around him. Caleb waited until the boy drifted back to sleep before stepping into the hallway. "Rosa," he said gently, "may I have a word?" Her body stiffened. She followed him silently to the small guest lounge. He didn't sit. "Your name. It's not really Rosa Martinez. Got it." She froze, breath caught mid-inhale. "You don't need to lie," he added softly. "I already know." Her hands trembled. "Please, don't call anyone. Don't hurt the boy for my mistakes." "I'm not calling anyone." Tears welled in her eyes. "My real name is Rosalinda Sparsa. I was a teacher back home. I taught first grade." Caleb's brow furrowed. "What happened?" She sank into the edge of the couch, voice quaking. "My fiancé, Diego, he published proof that a local official had been laundering school funds. He thought he was doing the right thing. They arrested him that night." She clasped her hands tightly together, as if bracing herself. "I ran, took my nephew, barely a baby. We planned to seek asylum. But during the crossing, he got sick. There was no medicine. He died in my arms before we reached the checkpoint." A soft, raw silence filled the room. She looked down, ashamed. "Since then, I've used different names, cleaned houses, took whatever jobs I could, never stayed too long. I was always running." She glanced up. "Now I stay because of your son, because when I hold him, I feel like I can breathe again." Caleb's jaw tensed. He wasn't used to stories that bent the law and the heart at the same time. "You saved Aiden's life. That's not a debt, that's a grace." Rosa turned away, brushing tears from her cheeks. "If anyone finds out, I'll be deported. I can't go through that again." That evening, she packed her things, left a short note on the kitchen table, Thank you for everything. I hope Aiden forgets me easily." But Aiden didn't forget. The moment he woke and found her gone, he cried, loud and desperate, clutching his chest like it might break open. "Where's Rosa? I want Rosa." Caleb tried calming him. "She had to go." "No," the boy wailed. "She's my safe place. I need her." Caleb stared at his son, gut twisting. That phrase, safe place, was what the therapist said Aiden had been missing since his mother's death, and now he had it, in Rosa. Caleb grabbed his phone and called her number. "Please," he said when she answered. "Come back. Not just for today. Stay. Be his caregiver, officially. Live here. No more running." There was silence on the other end. Then came her whisper. "Are you sure?" Rosa stood at the edge of the hospital courtyard, phone still pressed to her ear. The city lights flickered in the glass reflection beside her, but all she could think about was the sound of Aiden crying. Her heart twisted. She had promised herself never to get too close, and yet here she was, already too deep, already breaking that promise. "I'll come back," she said quietly, "but only if it's what's best for him." "It is," Clint answered without hesitation. "You saw it in his eyes. He trusts you." When Rosa returned that evening, Aiden flung himself into her arms. He didn't say a word, just clung to her like he never intended to let go. That embrace told her more than anything else ever could. She was needed, and maybe, just maybe, she belonged. Caleb approached her later, after Aiden had fallen asleep again. "I've taken steps," he said. "My legal team is discreet. They're going to look into options. There may be a path forward. Citizenship, protected status, I'll fund it all." Rosa's eyes widened. "Why?" "You saved my son's life," he said simply, "and you've been saving his heart every day since." She looked down. "But I'm still someone with no papers, no safety net." He met her gaze. "Not anymore." The days that followed moved carefully, but something inside Rosa began to settle. She stayed in the guest house on Caleb's estate, where the garden overlooked a small pond. She helped Aiden through his daily treatments, told him stories in both English and Spanish, and taught him how to fold paper cranes. Caleb watched, often from a distance, as Rosa turned their sterile home into something warmer. His staff noticed too. Laughter became more common. The kitchen, once common, the kitchen, once quiet, now smelled of cinnamon tea and tamales on Sunday mornings. But Rosa never let her guard drop fully. One night, Caleb found her alone in the garden, clutching a tiny blue pair of baby socks. "They were my nephew's," she explained when she noticed him. "The only thing I kept." "You've carried a lot of pain," he said. "Had to," she replied. "I didn't think anyone else would carry it for me." Abel took a step closer. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." She didn't respond right away, but her silence wasn't rejection, it was weight. It was the deep ache of someone slowly learning to trust again. Weeks passed, and Rosa settled into the role of Aiden's full-time caregiver. At a formal board dinner one evening, Caleb introduced her simply as Aiden's guardian angel. Afterward, as they walked back to the car, Rosa looked at him with guarded humor. "Guardian angel, huh? That's a bit much." "I don't think it's enough," he said. At night, Caleb sat at his desk once more. The man who once ruled by efficiency, by logic, now scrolled through paperwork and legal pathways that could offer a woman with no country a new chance. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew two things for certain. Aiden was finally healing, and Rosa was more than a caretaker. She was becoming family. The next morning, as Rosa poured Aiden's orange juice and hummed an old Spanish lullaby, she noticed a manila folder on the table. She opened it slowly. Inside, a preliminary application for humanitarian parole, with her name written in full, Laurelance. Her hands trembled, tears stinging her eyes. Caleb walked in, coffee in hand. "I hope that wasn't too forward." Rosa looked up at him. "It's a start," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "Then let's keep going. Together." And for the first time in years, Rosa didn't feel like she was hiding. She felt like she was home. Caleb's house had never felt so alive. Rosa moved through the hallways with quiet grace, her hands now familiar with the rhythm of Aiden's routine. His vitamins in the morning, his favorite story before bed, the exact lullaby that helped him drift off to sleep when the nightmares came. But there was something new stirring beneath the surface, an unease she couldn't name. At breakfast one morning, Aiden pushed aside his toast and leaned in with his usual childlike honesty. "Dad smiled at you," he said, as if revealing a government secret. The real smile, not the business one. Rosa flushed. "He was just being polite, Kirk." Aiden said, grinning. "He likes you, I can tell. His ears go red when he does." She laughed, but her chest tightened. It was dangerous to hope, and even more dangerous to... Later that day, while sorting laundry upstairs, Rosa overheard voices drifting from Caleb's study. The door wasn't fully closed. "She's undocumented," one voice said, female, clipped, clearly someone from the corporate office. "If this gets out, there'll be headlines. CEO harbors illegal nanny. It could tank your credibility." Rosa froze, clutching a towel. Caleb's voice responded calmly. "She's not a risk. She's the reason Aiden is still alive. Be that as it may, we're advising that she be distanced." Quietly. A heavy silence followed. Then Caleb's words, low and firm. Just that, one word, but it hit Rosa like thunder. That evening, Rosa found herself standing at the window in the guest room, arms wrapped around her middle, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. She thought of running again, just running away in the night like she always had. But something was different this time. Someone was different. The next day, Caleb came into the kitchen while she was chopping vegetables. He didn't speak right away, just watched her hands work, how carefully she moved. When she looked up, he was leaning against the counter, his eyes unreadable. "Someone from PR came by," he said. "They don't like you here." "I heard," she replied softly. His brow furrowed. "You weren't supposed to?" She gave a faint smile. "You forget, I know how to listen from corners." He walked closer, voice quieter. "I told them no. You're not going anywhere." Rosa looked down. "They're not wrong, Caleb. If the wrong person finds out who I am..." "I already found out," he interrupted, "and I'm still standing here." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He exhaled. "Because for the first time in a long time, my son is happy. And for the first time, I want to be someone he can be proud of." That night, Aiden asked Rosa to sing the lullaby again. As she tucked him in, he reached up and touched her cheek. "Can you stay forever?" Her heart cracked open. "I'll stay as long as you need me," she whispered. He closed his eyes, satisfied. Later, as she walked past Caleb's office to return to her room, she found the door ajar. A file lay open on his desk. Her file. And beside it, a letter addressed to an immigration attorney. She stood there in the hallway, breath caught. Was he helping her? Or preparing for war? Rosa stepped back from the doorway before Caleb noticed. Her heart pounded as she returned to her room, shutting the door behind her with trembling fingers. She leaned against it, trying to make sense of what she saw. The letter, her name, a lawyer. Was he turning her in or protecting her? Sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it did, it was filled with the same dream she'd had for years, running through smoke, clutching a baby who was already gone. Waking up always left her gasping. The next morning, Caleb stood in the kitchen, already dressed for work, sleeves rolled and tie loosened. He looked tired, as if he too hadn't slept. On the counter beside him was a stack of papers and 2 cups of coffee. He slid one toward her. "I want you to read this," he said, tapping the top paper. "It's not a report, it's a choice." She hesitated before picking it up. It was a draft petition, a legal appeal to reopen her immigration case, and at the bottom, his signature. "You'd sponsor me?" she asked, voice barely audible. He nodded. "Not because I owe you, but because you deserve to be seen." She blinked quickly, willing the tears back. "I'm not used to kindness coming without cost." Caleb leaned forward. "Then let me be the one to change that." That evening, Aiden ran out to the porch with a drawing in his hand. "I made this for both of you," he said proudly. It was a crayon sketch, Aiden in the middle, holding hands with Caleb on one side and Rosa on the other. A heart floated above them, and below, written in crooked letters, "My safe place." Caleb stared at it for a long moment, then ruffled his son's hair. Rosa pressed her hand to her chest. Later, as the sky turned orange and gold, Rosa joined Caleb on the porch swing. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. "That I deserve to be seen?" He turned to face her fully. "Rosa, no. Rosalinda, you've spent your life being invisible to survive, but you're not invisible anymore." A pause. "I see you," he added, his voice raw, "and I think I have for a while." She inhaled deeply, letting the words settle. "You have no idea how much I want to believe that." "Then let me prove it," he said. "Not with papers or promises, but with time." The next morning, something had shifted. She walked through the house, not as a guest or a ghost, but as someone beginning to belong. Even the staff who once eyed her warily now smiled, offering morning greetings. Aiden danced around her legs, chattering about a school art project. Caleb watched it all unfold from his study window, then opened a locked drawer. Inside was a faded photo, his late wife and Aiden as a baby. He looked at it for a long time, then gently placed it beside the new crayon drawing. 2 women, 2 chapters. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The morning sunlight filtered through Caleb's office window as he stood before a sea of flashing cameras and murmuring reporters. The press conference had been hastily arranged, the air charged with speculation. Rumors had swirled about the mysterious woman seen with his son, the same woman some were already calling an illegal threat in headlines. But Caleb didn't flinch. "I called you here today," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion, "to make one thing clear. Rosa Martinez is not a threat. She is the reason my son is alive." A hushed ripple swept through the room. She stepped in when no one else could reach Aiden. When even the best nurses failed, she calmed him. She held him. She stayed, and she did it not for fame or money, but out of compassion. That's the kind of person she is. Cameras clicked furiously as he continued. "Eat him. I intend to sponsor her legal status, and I will ensure that Rosa is given every protection she deserves." From the back of the crowd, a few gasps escaped. Others were visibly stunned. But Caleb wasn't finished. "This isn't about charity," he added. "This is about justice. About standing up for someone who never asked to be noticed, but deserved to be seen all along." Later that day, Rosa sat on a bench in the hospital's quiet garden, stunned. Her fingers trembled as she rewatched the press conference on her phone. Her name, her story, her face, all of it spoken aloud by one of the most powerful men in the country. And not with shame, but pride. She didn't know whether to feel gratitude or fear. When Caleb finally found her outside, the air between them was thick with silence. He sat beside her without saying a word for a moment. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "All right," he replied gently, "but you earned it." She shook her head, looking down. "Why are you doing this, Caleb?" He turned toward her. "Because for the first time in a very long time, I believe in someone again. And it's you." Her eyes glistened. "You shouldn't." Too late. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But there were still pieces of her past buried so deep, ones she had never dared to share with anyone. Not even Aiden, not even Caleb. That night, back at the Vance residence, the mood was calm. Aiden had fallen asleep early, the exhaustion of recent treatments weighing heavy on his tiny frame. Rosa stood in the dimly lit kitchen, her hands gently washing a glass, when Caleb approached. "Can we talk?" She turned, nodding. But before he could say another word, she leaned in. It was soft, tentative, a test of something fragile, born from long nights and whispered reassurances. But the moment it ended, Rosa stepped back, pain flickering in her eyes. "I can't." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Why not?" Because you don't know everything. I need to tell you something. He waited. I had a son, she said. Years ago, before I came here. Caleb froze, listening. I gave birth in a shelter, alone. No one knew. I named him Mateo. But I couldn't raise him, not while running, not while hiding. I gave him up, so he could have a chance, a real one. Tears shimmered in her eyes. It's my biggest regret, and my only mercy. Caleb didn't pull away. Instead, he reached for her hand. You did what you had to, and you did it with love. A moment passed, then another. Rosa exhaled, her shoulders sagging. Before either could say more, a nurse rushed into the room. It's Aiden. He's spiking a fever again. We need you. Rosa's fear returned instantly. Without hesitation, she ran. The hospital room was dim, machines humming in steady rhythm, but Aiden's breathing was labored, shallow. His little face was flushed, his small body curled beneath the covers like a wounded bird. Rosa sat by his bedside instantly, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead, whispering in Spanish, Mi cielo, estoy aquí. I'm here. The nurses moved efficiently, but even they stepped back, giving Rosa space, as if they knew that her presence brought a kind of comfort medicine couldn't. Caleb stood at the door, helpless. He had faced billion-dollar acquisitions, courtroom battles, and media storms, but none of it compared to this, watching his son's chest rise and fall as if each breath was a negotiation between life and loss. The doctors returned with lab results. One of them, a tall woman in a crisp white coat, stepped forward. We've done all we can with conventional treatment, she said softly, but there's an experimental therapy. It's not without risk, but it could help regulate the immune dysfunction we're seeing. Caleb didn't blink. Do it. Rosa looked up sharply. Are you sure? Caleb met her gaze. If there's a chance it can save him, we take it. The doctor nodded. It will take a few hours to prepare. After the room cleared, Rosa stayed at Aiden's side. She didn't move. She didn't sleep. She just sat there, hand wrapped gently around his. At one point, Caleb returned with a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. But he didn't try to speak. He knew some silences weren't meant to be broken. Hours passed. At one point, Aiden stirred, eyes fluttering. Rosa leaned closer. Of course, he murmured. I'm right here, sweetheart, she whispered, squeezing his hand. I dreamed we were flying, he mumbled. You were holding my hand, and Daddy was laughing. She blinked back tears. That sounds like a beautiful dream. I don't want you to go, he added weakly. I'm not going anywhere. Caleb watched her from the doorway, something twisting deep in his chest. How was it that this woman, this stranger, just days ago, had become the safest person in their lives? When the medical team finally came in to begin treatment, Rosa refused to leave the room. She sat through every injection, every tremor, every groan from Aiden's throat, never flinching, never looking away. At sunrise, when the machines finally quieted and Aiden's breathing evened out, one of the nurses turned and whispered, "His vitals are stabilizing." Rosa let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She bent down, kissed Aiden's forehead, and whispered, "You're so strong, mi amor." Behind her, Caleb stepped closer. "So, are you?" She didn't turn to look at him, not yet. Her body was too tired, her heart too raw. But his voice, deep and steady, wrapped around her like a promise. "I meant what I said at the press conference," he told her. "You're not alone anymore." "I'm not used to being believed," she whispered. "Well, get used to it." She smiled faintly, her fingers never leaving Aiden's. Later that morning, as sunlight spilled through the window, Rosa stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself. Caleb joined her, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed her one. "What now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said, "we keep going. For him, and maybe for us too." She looked at him, exhaustion and hope swirling in her eyes. "I don't know how to be anything more than what I've had to survive," Caleb replied. "Then let me show you what it means to live again. Not for fear, not for shame, but for love." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She just took his hand and didn't let go. The monitors beat steadily, but Caleb's breath caught every time the rhythm faltered. Aiden looked so small in that massive hospital bed, his skin pale, his little fingers limp against the white sheets. Rosa sat at his side, one hand stroking his hair, the other gripping a worn piece of prayer cloth, tucked into her pocket. She hadn't left his bedside in 2 days. Caleb had offered to take shifts, to give her food, to give her rest. But she refused each time. The doctors hovered outside the door. A new test had shown signs of inflammation. The medication was failing. Olivia was ready to see her son again that morning, and panic surged in Caleb's chest like a crashing wave. He'd done everything, flown in specialists, approved round-the-clock care. But none of it mattered if they couldn't keep his son stable. "I think I know something," Rosa whispered softly, not taking her eyes off Aiden. Caleb turned to her, weary. "What is it?" "My grandmother used to make a herbal tea from a special blend," she said slowly, as if afraid of her own voice. "It was passed down. It's not medical, but it helped children in my village survive fevers like this when nothing else worked." Caleb hesitated. "What's in it?" But Rosa gave him a quiet herbs he'd never heard of. Some were banned for use in hospitals due to unregulated sourcing. Others weren't even carried by pharmacies. Still, something in her eyes, gentle, desperate, steady, made him nod. By nightfall, the tea was ready. Rosa steeped it carefully, cooled it, and gently touched the cup to Aiden's lips. Caleb held his son's head as he drank. The nurses objected quietly. One even called the attending doctor, who stormed in, furious. "This is reckless. Unregulated treatment can result in adverse reactions." Caleb stood between the doctor and the bed, voice cold. "You've had 3 days and no progress. If it were your child, would you wait?" There was a silence. And then the fever broke. Not all at once, but slowly. The sweat on Aiden's brow cooled. His breathing eased. By morning, the inflammation markers had dropped. Rosa's hands trembled as she touched his cheek. "He's stabilizing," the nurse confirmed, her voice tinged with disbelief. But there was no time to celebrate. And afternoon, Caleb got the call. A reporter had unearthed Rosa's past. The story was everywhere. Angel without papers, the undocumented woman who saved a Kekhair's son. The article included her real name, Rosalinda Sparza, and even hinted at her past as a fugitive. Photos of her entering Caleb's mansion accompanied every tabloid. Talk shows debated her motives. Anonymous sources speculated about her past relationships. That evening, an officer from immigration knocked at the hospital. "We've received a report regarding Miss Esparza's stone. We'll need to begin proceedings." Caleb's jaw clenched. "She's not going anywhere. She's undocumented. There's a process." Sincerely. "I saved him," she said softly. "And this child, my son, owes her his life." The officer handed him a court summons. Caleb worked fast. His legal team filed a petition for emergency humanitarian protection, citing Rosa's essential role in Aiden's survival and emotional well-being. Statements were prepared, medical reports were gathered, witnesses lined up. But Rosa was quiet. "What if the judge says no?" she asked Caleb that night, her voice no more than a whisper. "Then I fight harder." She shook her head. "I've run so long, I don't know how to stand still and hope." Caleb placed a hand over hers. "Then let me hope for both of us." The courtroom was smaller than Rosa expected, but it felt enormous. Every bench creaked with tension, and the ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than it should. Rosa sat beside Caleb, her hands folded in her lap, sweat clinging to her palms. She wore a simple blouse, the same one she'd worn to her nephew's funeral years ago. It was the only thing she owned that made her feel brave. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and thoughtful eyes, reviewed the stack of documents before her. Caleb's lawyers had done their part, framing Rosa not as a risk, but as an irreplaceable caregiver and a woman of integrity. But it wasn't enough to rely on paperwork. Rosa was called to the stand. She stood slowly, every step forward weighted with history, lost love, buried identity, pain, and hope. When she sat in the witness chair, She took a breath that shook her frame. "My name is Rosalinda Esparza," she began, voice soft but unwavering. "I came to this country not to break laws, but to escape them. My fiancé was imprisoned for standing up to corruption. My family was torn apart. I lost my nephew trying to get him to safety." The courtroom was silent. I took a new name because it was the only way to survive. I cleaned floors, washed linens, stayed invisible until one day a little boy collapsed in front of me and needed someone. I didn't think, I just moved. Her eyes welled with tears. "I didn't come here for charity, and I'm not asking for pity. I just want the right to keep loving the boy who calls me his safe place." Across the room, Aiden sat next to a nurse, small hands folded, wide eyes locked on Rosa. His presence in the courtroom had been a last-minute plea. Caleb insisted the judge see the connection for herself. The judge leaned forward. "And if this court denies your petition?" Rosa's voice broke slightly. "Then I'll go, but my heart, it'll stay here." A heavy silence settled as she stepped down. Caleb took the stand next. He didn't speak like a COO, not this time. "She walked into my life as a stranger. Now she's the reason my son smiles again. That's not something you can buy or fake. That's love." The judge requested time to review all the evidence. A decision would come the next morning. That night, back at the hospital, Rosa curled up beside Aiden's bed. Caleb sat across from them, watching, not saying a word. The fear of losing her again gripped him in a way that surprised him. As the monitors beeped softly, a din voice stirred. His eyes blinked open, heavy with sleep. "Rosa? I'm here, sweetheart." His hand reached out for hers, small fingers wrapping around hers tightly. "Don't leave, Mama." The words settled into her bones. She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Caleb stood frozen in place. Aiden wasn't guessing. He wasn't playing. He had chosen. Rosa leaned forward, kissing his forehead. "I won't go anywhere." He looked up at Caleb, eyes full of a storm held at bay, and for the first time, he stepped closer, knelt beside her, and whispered, "We're not losing you. Not now. Not ever." The next morning would determine her fate. But in that moment, wrapped in the warmth of a child's trust and a man's promise, Rosa felt something she hadn't in years. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that made people hold their breath without realizing it. Rosa sat at the front, her hands tightly clasped in her lap, fingers interlocked like roots clinging to survival. Caleb sat beside her, his posture composed but his eyes stormy. Aiden was back at the hospital, too weak to be present, but Rosa carried his crayon drawing in her purse, a tiny heart next to the word Mama. The judge finally looked up, reading glasses resting at the tip of her nose. In consideration of the emotional testimony, the humanitarian circumstances, and the unique role the respondent has played in the life of the child, this court rules in favor of Rosa Martinez. Legal residency is hereby granted under emergency protection provisions. Case adjourned. Asps, tears. Applause broke from the back row, where a few nurses and neighbors had gathered quietly in support. Rosa's eyes, blurred with tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry until now. She covered her mouth, disbelieving. Caleb stood first, reaching out a hand to help her up. She took it, rising slowly as though the floor might shift under her. Outside, cameras waited, paparazzi flashed lights. But Rosa didn't care anymore. She had walked through fire. This was dawn. They stepped into the sunlit marble lobby of the courthouse, and for a second, time stilled. Caleb leaned in close and spoke softly. "You've been more than Aiden's caregiver, Rosa. You've been our hope." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Her chest ached from too many feelings rising at once. "I need you to come with me," he said gently, leading her to the car. The hospital room was quiet, only the faint beep of monitors and the occasional flutter of the IV drip tapping the silence. Aiden slept peacefully, curled like a cat on the bed. On the windowsill, sunlight filtered through a get-well card, casting soft rainbows across the room. Caleb motioned for Rosa to step outside with him. "Just a minute," he said. there's something I've been meaning to ask you." He led her down a short corridor and out into a hospital courtyard where a small fountain trickled. There, beneath the shade of a blossoming tree, he turned to face her. "I thought I had everything: power, wealth, a reputation that scared off most people. But then I nearly lost the only person who matters. And in the darkest moment, it wasn't my money that saved him. It was you." Rosa looked down, heart pounding. "Caleb, please, you don't have to thank me. You weren't just anything," he interrupted. "You became his anchor, and mine." He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. She stared, stunned, as he opened it. Inside was a simple ring. No diamonds, no grandeur, just a gold band engraved with a tiny rose and flame, delicate like her spirit. He went to one knee. Rosa blinked hard. "No. Caleb, please. You don't have to do this out of gratitude." He looked up at her, his voice steady. "It's not gratitude, it's love. You gave even when the world took everything from you, and you never stopped giving." Her lips trembled. "I don't deserve this," he said, rising, taking her hand. "You do, because you taught me what strength really looks like, and because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears slid down her cheeks as she stared at the ring, then at him. He didn't push, he didn't plead. He simply waited, like a man who had finally learned the value of patience. And just when the silence between them felt like it might shatter her heart, she whispered, "Let's go back to Aiden." She didn't pull her hand away. They returned to Aiden's room in silence. Rosa's hand still rested in Caleb's, fingers curled around his like a secret she wasn't ready to release. When they entered, Aiden stirred, blinking slowly as he woke. The little boy's face lit up when he saw Rosa. "You came back," he whispered, his voice raspy. Rosa knelt beside the bed, brushing his hair back gently. "I told you I'd never leave you, remember?" Aiden nodded, then glanced at Caleb. "Daddy, did she win? Can she stay?" Caleb smiled. "She can, buddy. She's not going anywhere." Aiden's face broke into a sleepy grin. "Good. I had a dream we were a family, like real family." Rosa looked at Caleb, startled. Caleb just raised an eyebrow. "Dreams are funny that way. Sometimes they come true." Aiden sat up a little more. "Wait, I have something to show you." He reached for the drawer beside his bed and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Crayon lines stretched across it. 3 stick figures, one tall, wearing a tie, one with a scarf, and one in the middle, smiling with big round eyes. Above them floated a giant red heart, and beneath it the words, "My family." Caleb crouched beside Rosa. "You see, he already knows what we're just figuring out." Aiden tilted his head. "Can I call you Mom now?" Rosa's heart caught. Her throat tightened as she stared at the drawing, then at Aiden's hopeful eyes. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Only if I can call you my son." Aiden grinned and reached for her. She pulled him into a soft hug, holding him like she'd never let go. Later that afternoon, Rosa stepped into the hospital garden to catch her breath. She still couldn't believe it. Just days ago, she'd been packing a small duffel bag, preparing to run again. And now, she belonged somewhere. She was seen, chosen, loved. Behind her, Caleb stepped out into the sunlight and walked over, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "You didn't answer me earlier," he murmured. She turned to face him. "About what?" He reached into his pocket again and held up the velvet box. "I may not be great at flowers or lullabies," he said, "but I know when I've found the person who makes this chaotic life make sense." Rosa looked at him, tears brimming again. She touched the ring gently, her fingers shaking. "Do you really mean this?" "Everything I am." She nodded slowly, then smiled through the tears. "Then yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had always belonged there. Inside, Aiden watched from the window, fists pumping in silent celebration. He grabbed his crayons and drew another picture. This time, there was a wedding cake and 3 stick figures, wearing matching smiles. That night, as they sat beside Aiden's bed, Caleb resting his arm behind Rosa and Aiden snuggled beside her, the world outside faded away. Ursa whispered. You know, when I was hiding, I used to dream of things like this, but they felt so far away. Caleb kissed her temple. Now they're here, and they're yours. Rosa closed her eyes and let the warmth settle in her chest. The warmth of love freely given, of a life reclaimed, of a name spoken without fear. She wasn't just Rosa Martinez anymore. She was a mother, a partner, a woman who had finally found her way home. And in the soft quiet of the hospital room, their story turned its final page, not an ending, but the start of everything they never thought they'd have. The morning sun poured gently into the floral shop, casting golden light across the counter where Elena Reyes stood, her fingers trembling around a delicate stem of white peony. The air was thick with the scent of roses and freesia, but the heaviness in her chest overpowered even the strongest bloom. She was preparing a bouquet for a bride she barely knew. In the roses for devotion, sprigs of myrtle for love and marriage, and lily of the valley for hope. It should have been routine, but her eyes stung. She paused, one hand brushing the silk scarf around her cheek, as if shielding more than just the scar beneath it. The bouquet blurred, a tear slipped past her lashes before she could stop it, landing silently on the peony. A bell above the door jingled softly. Ellen. Adrian's voice filled the quiet like a gentle storm. He stepped inside, holding something in his hands, a small black box, his fingers curled tightly around it. His eyes immediately found hers, and whatever he saw on her face made his jaw tighten with emotion. She quickly turned, trying to regain composure. I wasn't expecting you today. I know, he said, but I couldn't wait. He stepped closer, slowly giving her space. She didn't move, but her hands fidgeted with the ribbon on the bouquet. Elena, he said again, softer now. This morning, I walked past that old mural at the garden, the one the kids painted of you, and I thought, they see you. Not as someone broken, but someone who made beauty from pain. She looked up, startled. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small box. Then he opened it. Inside sat a single ring. No diamonds, no grandeur, just a simple gold band. Wrapped around it was a thin strip of silk. Ivory, delicate, eerily similar to the scarf she always wore. Elena's breath caught in her throat. I don't come with promises of fairy tales, Adrian said, voice steady but thick with feeling. I know I broke something precious between us once. I know I can't erase what you went through, but I've spent every day since I found you again learning what love really is. Her eyes filled again, the bouquet in her hand trembled. He knelt. The motion was slow, reverent. Elena Reyes, he said, you were never forgotten. Even when I was lost, even when I didn't know how to find my way back, you lived in the part of me that still believed in better days. You don't need saving, you never did, but I do. And I need to show you what love looks like when it stays. Her lips parted, the words forming in her chest but unable to rise past the ache. He looked up at her, his eyes shimmering. Will you let me love you, scar and all? For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock behind the register. She slowly bent down, set the bouquet gently beside him, and removed the scarf from her cheek. The burn scars shimmered in the sunlight like silver threads. I wore this, she whispered, to keep the world from seeing what was left of me, but you looked right through it. She reached out, touching the ring with the tip of her finger. I thought I was ruined, she said, but I'm not. I'm blooming again. Adrian rose slowly, his breath caught between hope and awe, as Elena gently took the ring from the box. Her fingers brushed the silk wrap, the soft fabric echoing the one that had hidden her pain for years. But now, it held something else. Trust, a symbol of healing. She looked at him, eyes shimmering. Yes, she whispered, because I'm not broken, just blooming again. His exhale was shaky, like he'd been holding it since the night he lost her. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, not just the size, but the gesture. Quiet, honest, unadorned, just like her love. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't awkward, It was full, rich, like soil ready for new roots. Outside, the world carried on. Cars passed, a seagull cried somewhere near the shore, and the wind fluttered through the open window. But inside the shop, time had softened. It was just the two of them, and 1,000 blossoms bearing witness. Elena reached for the bouquet she had started earlier. The ribbon had loosened slightly, and she tied it tighter, her hands steadier now. She added one final flower, a yellow tulip for new beginnings, and smiled at the arrangement. "I made this for someone else," she said, "but I think it was really for me." He nodded. "Then let it be our beginning too." That night, after the shop closed, they didn't go anywhere extravagant. Instead, they walked down to the beach where they once spent long summer nights years ago, before the fire, before the scars, before the silence. They sat on the cool sand, shoes off, waves licking at their feet. The moon cast silver across the water, and Elena leaned her head on Adrian's shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, and for the first time in years her body didn't flinch from being seen. From being held. "You were always the strongest person I knew," he murmured. "I was just trying to survive," she replied. "And now," he asked, turning to her gently, "of your mother, I want to live." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she closed her eyes. Later, he took her hand again and led her up the path behind the dunes, where he'd parked his car. But instead of heading home, they stopped by the orphanage garden. The mural was lit by small solar lights, her face surrounded by painted lilies, rosemary, and daffodils. "I helped paint this," he admitted, "but the kids chose the flowers." She stared at the image of herself. Not as she once was, not as the girl before the fire, but as the woman who rose. "I don't deserve this," she said quietly. "You deserve more," he answered. "This is just the start." She turned to him, tears pooling again, not from sadness but from release. "Then let's write the rest, together." He didn't need to reply. He just kissed her, under the glow of the mural with the scent of blossoms and wet earth in the air. The bouquet still rested in the shop's window the next morning, its petals open, as if waiting for someone to believe in second chances.